Today's episode is brought to you by Momentous. Now, I'm not going to win any fans by saying this, but I'm not a huge coffee guy. It was only after about 3 years worth of travel to Australia that I started to go to the dark side a little bit, if you want to call it that, because a friend talked me into trying a flat white. So that is one thing that I will drink. But by and large, I can't do a lot of stimulants. I don't like the taste of coffee. If I have too much caffeine, in some respects, I'll start getting super anxious. I'll start sweating more than I normally do. And if you already know me, you know I'm like the warmest human alive. So I need something else to keep me focused, especially in the afternoons when I start to hit a circadian dip. And Momentous's Brain Drive has been huge on that for me. Now, this is NSF certified for sport. That means it meets Olympic testing standards for safety, right? This isn't some kind of crazy pre-workout that your friend had in his gym locker. And whether you're an executive, whether you are just a stay-at-home parent, whether you're a coach, whether you're an athlete, whether you're anything under the sun, right? We can all benefit from a little boost. So I encourage you, check it out. Go to livemomentous.com, check out Brain Drive, and you can save 25% by using code BRETT25. So that's livemomentous.com, Brain Drive, and use code BRETT25 to save 25%. Welcome to the Art of Coaching Podcast, a show aimed at getting to the core of what it takes to change attitudes, behaviors, and outcomes in the weight room, boardroom, classroom, and everywhere in between. I'm your host, Brett Bartholomew. I'm a performance coach, keynote speaker, and the author of the book, Conscious Coaching. But most importantly, I'm a lifelong student interested in all aspects of human behavior and communication. I want to thank you for joining me, and now let's dive into today's episode. Life is improv. I mean, think about it. You guys have no idea what I'm going to say next. I have no idea what you're doing right now. And if we interacted, we're going to constantly be wondering, okay, what's the other person going to say? How should I respond to it? You don't know which of your flights are going to get canceled in the upcoming holiday season. You don't know a number of things, even if you have a staff meeting, you have no idea what's going to go on. You might have an idea, right? But every single day we encounter seemingly random occurrences that we have to adapt to the best we can. And today's guest is an expert in all things improv. Her name's Patricia Ryan Madson, and she literally is a world authority on improvising in everyday life. She's also the author of Improv Wisdom, Don't Prepare, Just Show Up, which is an enchanting book that has been translated into 9 languages, including audio and ebook format. And she is a professor emerita from Stanford University, where she has taught since 1977. Specifically in their drama department, she served as the head of the undergraduate acting program and developed the improvisation program. In 1998, she was the winner of the Lloyd W. Dinkelspiel Award for Outstanding Innovation in Undergraduate Education at Stanford. And how important is that, guys? I don't know about you, but so often our undergraduate education has so many gaps in terms of application to the real world. So we have to take that and honor that for what it is, because we need more people who are more adaptable. Now, she's also a frequent speaker for business and educational groups. Her corporate clients have included IDEO, Google, Gap, Inc.'s executive leadership team, the Lucille and David Packard Foundation, Banff Centre for Leadership Education, Sun Microsystems, and the like. Now, here's something I'm going to challenge you guys with. We run improv workshops, and every now and then we will get somebody being like, this would never happen. Well, the reality of it is improv is about what is possible, not just plausible. And we always have to keep an open mind with these things. And if you don't believe me, well, listen, there's something that these organizations, IDEO, Google, Gap, they know that you don't. So how much of this really comes down to our egos and us just not being comfortable with uncertainty? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So without further ado, Patricia Ryan Madson. Hey everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Art of Coaching podcast. I'm humbled today to be with Patricia Madson. Patricia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Brent.
Now, this is a little bit nerve-wracking for me because our listeners know we teach through our apprenticeship workshop a lot of improv. Now, we don't do it at your level, but we are certainly working at it. And to orient any of you that maybe skipped through the bio, we're talking to really a world authority on improv. Her book, and this is all linked. So I encourage you guys to go to the show notes, check it out. She's the author of Improv Wisdom. Don't prepare, just show up. Patricia, I have to ask the obvious question. Why the interest in improv, and why did you make this such a core focus of your life?
Well, it was actually out of desperation. I was trying to solve a problem. I was hired by Stanford in 1977 to come in and lead up the acting program in the drama department. And I had some experience and felt some confidence in dealing with actors in a normal way. But the Stanford students were so bright and always wanted to know the right answer to things. And so if I asked them, I don't know, what do you think? How would you feel in that situation? I got a sort of deer in the headlights look. They didn't know. And so it became clear that to deal with Stanford students who were all in their heads, I had to find some way to loosen them up, get their humanity working. And right at that point, Keith Johnstone appeared in my life, kind of like a magical guru. He was teaching along with my Tai Chi master, Al Huang, and the two of them, he introduced the book Impro, and all of a sudden I had a set of tools that I could bring back to try to help actors who were stuck in their heads get into their bodies and feelings. So it started that way, and then it's kind of been rolling along for 30 years since then, really.
And I value you talking about, you were hired in 1977 to head up the drama department. And of course, I'm co-hosting here with Allie Kirshner, my good friend and business partner. Now, one thing that Allie and I see a lot at the workshops that we teach is people tend to think that improv is only for theater or comedy. Now, of course, that isn't true, or is it? We don't want to have confirmation bias here, but talk a little bit about where you see the applications in everyday life through your experience, if you wouldn't mind. Then I'll let Allie jump in.
Sure. No, it's true. I think the most common misunderstanding is that it's really about comedy or jazz or something like that. What has certainly happened, and it's mushroomed over the years, because right now it's even a buzzword in businesses and corporations. And improv is a modus operandi. It's a way of doing something. So you can apply that way to anything. I know people who are using improv to train Alzheimer's caregivers, and to train first responders in crises, to train women's beach volleyball teams, for example. At Stanford, I can tell that story too. I got invited by the coach, Andrew, to come and do some improv games with a group of beach volleyball players. And it was really wonderful, because we can talk about the applications to coaching. Maybe Allie and I can get on that subject. But it's not rocket science. It's a group of principles. And I think that's the thing that I would love your listeners to understand, that improv is a system, a way of working, even a life way, that has a couple of really simple rules that if you follow them, and you can learn to trust yourself and do all kinds of things.
Patricia, as you're saying that, first of all, hi, it's been a while since I've seen you, but you and I have talked previously. I was at Stanford, where I also dealt with the Stanford students and trying to get them out of their head, but from a different realm. And even myself, I was a student athlete at a place very similar to Stanford and struggled with this same thing. I know that you consider yourself sort of a recovering perfectionist or something along those sorts, but maybe you could go into, for our listeners, some of those ideas, those topics, those systems that you're talking about that improv comprises.
I think one of the first things has to do with attention, where we're placing our attention. And today, there are so many things calling out for it. Everything's got a little red button that's screaming, look at me, open me, let me have your attention. So improvisers, first of all, learn to pay attention to what's actually happening right now. And that's hard because most of us, and why the subtitle of the book is Don't Prepare, Just Show Up. It doesn't mean don't prepare. We can't not prepare. Everything we do in life has some systems that we learn. But what we want to do when we improvise is not live that preparation, but we want to just arrive where we are in this now Zoom room with two wonderful faces and be here now. I mean, there's a lot going on now in the name of mindfulness. And I think there are certainly corollaries between the notion of paying attention right now. So paying attention right now and then accepting what you find, saying yes to it, rather than rejecting or criticizing or finding fault. So I have 4 A's: pay attention, accept what you find, and then appreciate it. You've got to then find the good in whatever that is, and then you've got to act. You got to do your part or do something. So it's really simple. But most of us get in our own ways, I think, and we mess back and forth with the plan we have and forget to just wake up and see where we are right now, and say what comes next.
Can you maybe give us an example of what this would look like in everyday life? Something that maybe happened to you recently, or so we just have an understanding of what it means to be present and accept a gift or say yes to something, and how we can all use these tools, as soon as we get off and from listening to this podcast.
Great. I think it's a wonderful question. I was just, so yesterday I was in the Safeway buying groceries, and I have a practice now. Whenever I interact with someone in sales, or if I'm doing something, I try to, if they have a name tag on, I notice their name. So here I am getting the groceries checked out, and I noticed that the checker, his name was Sean. So I said, "Hi, Sean, how's your day going? Looks like you've been standing for quite a while, haven't you?" And he kind of all of a sudden lit up and said, "Yeah, I've got this kind of heart condition." And he began telling me about his life as he continued to check my groceries. And there came between us a little moment of friendship where out of nowhere, paying attention, kind of accepting and noticing what was going on, commenting on it, created a moment of kind of richness, certainly for me, and I think for him too. And we often get so busy spinning things, or examples like I was planning to make my husband a so-and-so sandwich, and I open the refrigerator and there's no so-and-so there. So I pay attention to what's going on. Then I look around for what's next. And I think that's, if we give up on the notion that there's a right way to do everything, part of, I think, the miracle of improvising is trusting not just yourself. It's not me. I trust a sort of a greater situation. You could say trust reality, that an answer will be there. That's why a little game like opening a box and discovering that there's something in the box. I didn't know. Socks. Interesting. Okay. That I think we all fear if we have to improvise, that there'll be nothing there. That's the huge fear. There's nothing in my box. But believe me, there is in every circumstance. And so reality is going to give us opportunities if we notice, really take the time to notice who we're around and what's going on, and then act upon that moment.
Yeah, there was some wonderful examples there, and I appreciate the practicality, Patricia. To circle back to some things that you've said, and some of these are direct quotes, and I really value them. And I want to lay some context before the question here. You had mentioned, and even here, when we improvise, we are trying to make sense of the moment, to take account of what's going on right now. Just as a brief aside, I find that really cathartic myself, because I'm being brought in a couple of days to speak for an organization. And we always kind of do a call of figuring out how we can best serve them, how the presentation should be shaped, and what have you. And the information in this case was pretty Spartan. Corporate gave me an example of what they want me to do, but they're not my audience. They're the contractor. You know, the folks I'm speaking to still need to enjoy it. And wouldn't you know it, I don't have direct access to those individuals to figure out what would make that information most relevant to them and their problems. Because as you know, right, there's always perceptual gaps that we have. And so this is going to be a presentation that I told my team, hey, you know, a lot of this I'm going to improvise, because with lack of information, I need to be able to read the room. And that beats the heck out of, at least in my opinion, going in there with some kind of sterilized one size fits all message that is impersonal. You know, when you talk about making sense of the moment and not preparing, you know, is that in line with what you're speaking to a little bit before I go on to the second part of that question?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in the situation that you're talking about, if you show up there and even ask the audience, what's on your mind today? It's quite possible to elicit a real topic that can take you into what you really want to talk about. And I'm really with you, because I'm sad about how we often get stuck in a PowerPoint and in a presentation, and everybody is just looking at their watches, waiting to get out of there. So if you interact with the people that you're with, you can have a real human moment that can make a difference, I think.
Yeah. And I love that you say you're a recovering perfectionist, because that took me a while to get to that point, because we live in this society that you should come in prepared, you should show this, you should show that. And it's like, well, who says you're not prepared if you're willing to meet a problem head on? You know, at the other side of it, if we come in too prepared, you risk being tone deaf. And this is something that really stuck with me. I put it on a sticky note next to my desk. You had said, you know, improvisers understand that time is precious. They don't wait for inspiration. They show up and begin something. And now all of a sudden we're in the trenches, our hands are dirty, and that makes the information itself more practical. So it's funny, out of this thing that much of society may not fully understand and could see as impractical at first, right? Improv. Oh, that's what we see on Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's actually the answer to creating things that are the most practical in your day-to-day life. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, because right now no one could have wildly predicted the pandemic and the improvisation that is all of our lives right now. But you just made a point that I think is important. Improvisers are ready, fire, aim. And there's a way in which the action of firing, doing something, starts you, and then you're somewhere where you can develop that. If we wait to find that perfect starting place, certainly in almost anything in life, we don't have time for that. We really don't. We have to go forward, knowing that where we step then gives us an idea of where we could go. And I think it's discover. I think an improv class allows you to discover this when the stakes are low around making up some stories and trying games. But I think if we could see more in our everyday lives, if we could trust that it's okay that the way we're speaking isn't perfectly organized. I think also we are likely to be more credible if we're speaking from our natural ideas rather than from a perfectly prepared script.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on with that. I've found that, the core of what we teach is communication. Yet one thing we tell people is our goal is not to create robots that don't have any disfluencies. You will hear me stutter or say, I make the same mistakes anybody does, but good communication is contextual. right? Like if we could watch two people speak with the utmost fluency and that could seem robotic and disingenuous. Or you, myself, and Allie could go to some place in downtown Boston and hear folks with thick accents talking at a very rapid pace of speech and use variations of slang and what have you. And maybe to somebody else, that's poor communication, but to them, that's very contextually appropriate behavior. And this is the core of the next question I have for you is, with improvisus being kind of this Latin word or root of improv, and that literally meaning the unforeseen. And us trying to teach it to people that feel like there's a right idea and a right moment, and then they get stuck. Do you think the issue, and I know I'm asking you to pontificate, there's never a one size fits all answer. Feel free to take this anywhere. Do you feel like the issue is people begin to just self-monitor too much? Are we all so scared of not meeting pure objectivity-based standards, perfectionism, judgment? What is it that makes it so scary for people to explore the adjacent, possible, or unforeseen?
Sure. We all want to be loved. We all want people to like us and care about us. We all fear being stupid or in some way unaccepted. And it seems like the technology that we have now that allows us, for example, to text instead of have a conversation with someone is just reinforcing that. I really fear for the youth of today about not being able to have conversations, not being able to trust that it's fine to start anywhere and discover where you are with another person rather than knowing where it ought to be. And it's fear. I think that, and it's natural. Humans care about what others think about them. And there's, I think, the mistaken belief that if I get it right, then they'll like me or then it'll be okay. But I think you're more likely to have them like you if you're just yourself with all of the warts and improper phrases or whatever, however you might talk about that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And believe me, this is an open conversation. So if something doesn't make sense, I'll push back politely. And same thing, if we're not clear on anything, our listeners very much value, instead of something that is obsequious or everybody agreeing, it's great to kind of just have a conversation, be open about it. And so just the practicality and the thoroughness of your answers, super appreciated. Allie?
Yeah. So Patricia, in your book, you have 13 maxims that you talk about, and they're sort of like, concepts, rules, ideas that you base your philosophy on. And I'm curious if you can help me reconcile one of them, which is stay on course, right? So we're talking about the idea of just showing up, not necessarily preparing, being willing to go wherever with the conversation, with the activity, whatever you're doing. So how does staying on course, having an ultimate goal or having kind of guardrails in place, how can you reconcile that with the ideas that we just talked about?
Great question. Improvisation isn't just anything. Every moment has some context. There's always a point. There's always something we're doing. In the analogy of making lunch for my husband, finding the ingredients. In a basketball game, we're trying to make the most points by putting the ball through the hoop. However, on the road to doing that, we find ourselves in moments where there isn't a script or there isn't a play that has been diagrammed. I'm all of a sudden here with the rebound and there's nobody around me. So that there is always some kind of point or purpose. So if we imagine just doing anything for any kind of reason is what improv's about, I think that's a mistake. We have to notice the facts, whatever they are. The facts might be that what we're doing is making up a story in a Zoom room for an improv show. I'm trying to create a story. So there's a context. And the staying on course is a reminder that there are, I like that, frames, or there are there are walls, in a sense, of reality around us that we have to pay attention to. And to go back to the sports analogy again, it seems to me that one of the issues with teams, for example, is that they spend so much of their life, one, becoming very fit, and then learning a group of plays, of ways that they need to perform together. And they start doing those, but almost instantly that falls apart, and they're in a new moment that is an improvisation. So they're called upon, since they can't complete that play, something new has happened, they're called upon at that moment to pay attention, to notice what is going on, who is around, now what, and at that point, they need to trust their own instincts, their own impulses, their own body knowledge of everything. They bring their whole life into play at the moment where the plan falls apart, and they're improvising the play. And I think that's, instead of at that moment where the plan falls apart, the play that we were just going to do doesn't work because she slipped the ball, that's to me the most wonderful moment to wake up and trust your years of being part of reality, and knowing that there's an answer there if you will trust that and act on it. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you went there, because I was actually going to lead into a conversation that you and I have had previous, which was surrounding sport and using improv in coaching. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when there's no constraint whatsoever in a situation, it's hard because we don't have any information to work off of. Mm-hmm. But when there is too much constraint, we are constrained in terms of where we can go with a situation. And so with my athletes, we had a set of constraints, which was weight room, and we had a task, which was to get stronger, to get something out of the workout. But how we got there, we were able to work within that and improvise and find new ways and adjust to the individual's strengths and weaknesses. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about how improv could be used in sport in an educational teaching environment.
I think if coaches and leaders, sports, allow free play as well as kinds of prepared play, or create some kind of games and exercises that keep changing where attention is. When I went to do the workshop with the beach volleyball players at Stanford, the game we played, we stood in a circle, and we would send a word to another player. So I might say brick and throw it to you, Allie. And if you got the word brick, you had to throw a word to someone else that started with the last letter. So we set up a framework where then you might say kite to Brett, and he might say elephant back to me, and I'd say triangulate or something. And what was fun about that is that the improv game meant they couldn't decide in advance what to do. They had to wait until they knew what that letter was. So it turned out to be a favorite game, and Andrew said that they like to play that in their warm-ups because it was somehow a way to sort of stay awake to what's needed and then act in the moment. So it might be that coaches could figure out things that challenge the formulas in some way. But I love it that you're being creative with the world of fitness, because it would seem that there are so many rules of how to do that, and it's so easy to, well, let's do 42 reps of this and then run across the gym. But if you can find ways to make that spontaneous in some way, or give them jobs, or get them to make up exercises for the rest of the group to challenge the rest of the group. It might be that instead of top down, you could, they might have fun making up a strengthening exercise or game for their other teammates and watch them do it.
Yeah, absolutely. We found that not only was I learning from them, they were learning from each other when we did this. And, if again, the ultimate goal is learning, who am I to say that my exact workout routine that I've planned is going to be the right way to do it? Why not let them and their bodies dictate what feels good, what's natural? And, when you said that game that you played with the Stanford volleyball team, that led me to think of what we do at our apprenticeship. And I know Brett, maybe I'll pass this to Brett so we can talk a little bit more about that. But we see that coaches and other leaders that come and play that very game really struggle to, again, get out of their head. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm curious, so I'll let you answer and then I'll pass it to Brett. I'm curious why you think people who are educators and know that learning is important and even might buy into autonomy and choice and the idea of play still struggle when they have to do it.
I know. Well, I think it goes back to the thing, especially educators don't want to be seen as making a mistake or stupid, or it's status and fear. And I think you're right. I've often found that teachers have the hardest time being willing to try something at which they might, I never even think of failing, but at which there might be some result that didn't make them look really smart. We all really want to look smart. And I think if we could just give up on that, to let them, and in fact, if the teacher models making mistakes in public, that is so helpful. I think that's how I've gotten by with a lot. Being a Stanford professor who goes blah, 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 and makes mistakes all over the place seems to be helpful to students.
Yeah, I think, staying on that discussion, there's some interesting things here and there's a lot of directions I want to go with this, but just to bridge off Allie's question, if we're using good improv, for part of my doctorate, Patricia, I asked this very question and I'd love to get your take on it. We asked a wide range of questions in semi-structured interviews to over 20 professionals in a wide range of fields. And we had asked them, everything from their views on improv and do they think it would help them deal with uncertainty in the workplace to, how many people in their field, whatever that may be, deal with failure. And one question that I thought was very interesting is I asked them verbatim, how receptive do you believe coaches are to the feedback or an evaluation from other coaches, specifically as it pertains to communication? Because as Allie alluded to in our workshops, people are going to be there with their peers. And one individual, and I'm going to refrain from names, just anonymity, said, not very receptive if I'm honest. Feedback in our field is often perceived as a threat or reprimand. And this is exactly what is interesting. He goes on to say that even if somebody gives you a tip, instead of looking at that as a learning moment, they think, well, it's almost accosting them. In our field, if you suggest a new drill or new exercise, not in the context of improv, right? For something like physical development or sports performance, it's, hey, that's helpful. Thank you. That might help my athlete get around this despite their knee pain. However, if you give them a new communication tip, or if you give them a suggestion of how to deal with some kind of conflict by creating a constraint or a creative opportunity, then it's like, well, now you're attacking me personally. Well, one, you're giving me something that can improve me tactically. If you give me an exercise, a drill, or a piece of technology, that's not quite so close to the ego, right? I'm going to take that and use it to make me better. But if you start telling me how I handled this situation or how I should have been more receptive, or maybe how I should have built off a yes and, that's a personal thing. And I found that really interesting. Any thoughts on that? I want to leave that fairly open-ended at first.
No, I think you're right that it's hard. Communication is closer than ourselves, so that if you give me suggestions about my manner of presentation, it can be seen as critical or threatening. So you have to, I think, find ways to truly yes and if you're going to work to help someone shift in some way. An improv classroom, I think, most important thing is that it's a safe place to do almost anything. And my job as the leader is to embrace whatever it is and never correct and never say no, but finding ways to always take whatever's going on, that behavior you want to change, embrace it, accept it, attend to it, accept it, appreciate it. There's a kernel of good in that lousy thing that the person is doing. So can you find the kernel of good in that and then help them maybe turn it around?
Yeah, well, it speaks to one of your core constructs, right? Stay on course. And so if somebody gives us a feedback, or, when I did take an improv comedy course, there was side coaching that took place, right? And there's plenty of ways I wanted to respond to that side coaching. I have trouble kind of letting go a little bit. But then I realized, hey, what's the goal here, right? To keep the scene going, to keep the ball in the air, whatever that looks like metaphorically, right? If we have a business deal going, let's think of solutions. If we are coaching somebody and there's an issue, well, let's keep going, keep the ball in air, stay on course. And so this is where I'd like to play a little bit of improv with you, if that's allowable. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a situation here where, I'm trying to, maybe I'm not convinced that improv, I've listened to this, I've done some research, and I'm still not convinced. And of course we know that to a point, there's a limit to how much we should try to convince people that can't be convinced. But what if I were to say to you, hey, Patricia, all right, so I get that improv is part of daily life, right? You and Brett and Allie are improvising right now. Nobody knows what's going to be said or asked. But we don't seem to train for daily life. And that's how we become more experienced, or that's how we gain perspective. So then what is the value, Patricia, in me even training for improv? If improv is life, why train for this? Doesn't it just handle itself?
You're absolutely right. I mean, training has its advantages. I would never try to kind of change your mind about that. What I'd suggest is what you're doing now working? So is that working? And if it's not, I don't know, try C. I mean, there might be some tools and techniques that are used by professionals at Stanford University and in the School of Engineering that those tools could be helpful, but I don't know. You might be right. But is it working now? So I think that I'm a bad person to ask about this because I've never been good at marketing or trying to sell what I do. In fact, I've actually had clients that have come to me and that have asked me, would you please give us a kind of an outline of what you're going to do in the workshop and on how we're going to benefit from it. And we'd like to know all of that before we, sign on and go to the retreat. And I have to say, I'm really sorry. I'm delighted to take this job, but I'm going to be improvising. And so if I wrote out a list of what I'm going to do, I would not be true to this subject. So I'm really sorry. What I will promise you is that after the workshop, I will send you a list of what we did.
Time is running out with respect to your opportunity to improve within 2021. Guys, we have 3 live events left in the world this year: Nashville, Tennessee, the United Kingdom, and Asheville, North Carolina. These are the last 3 we will be running. So if you are somebody that is a leader in your organization, an aspiring leader, whether you're a firefighter, whether you're a strength coach, whether you're in the corporate realm, no matter what you do, if you deal with people and you're constantly trying to figure out how to work through people's agendas, how to think faster on your feet, how to get better in terms of your decision-making and the way you communicate your knowledge, bottom line, how you get people to buy into what you're trying to do so that you can impact more lives, you need to go to artofcoaching.com/apprenticeship now. artofcoaching.com/apprenticeship now. Early bird discounts are available, but time is running out. artofcoaching.com/apprenticeship.
I'm delighted to take this job, but I'm going to be improvising. And so if I wrote out a list of what I'm going to do, I would not be true to this subject. So I'm really sorry. What I will promise you is that after the workshop, I will send you a list of what we did and the games that we played. But I can't do that. And so, go get somebody who will.
Well, this is what's so wonderful about what you said there, because you don't sell what you do, yet your client list is incredible. IDEO, Google, Gap, all these executive teams, right? And I didn't even name all of them. But when you talk about the list of what you do, I found that when I'm asked that question, and you and Allie already alluded to this so perfectly, and when you say, well, what is what you're doing working? So for example, we play a game called Halflife, Your Message. And sometimes we just innocuously throw this into the introduction of the workshop. Sometimes, we had a business owner one time at one in Winnipeg, and we helped it was related to their marketing campaign. I'll give some sporting context in a minute. But in this situation, we said, hey, we're going to have everybody stand up, introduce themselves. You have 1 minute. And they know this is fun. It's not taken as kind of a directive, like you only have 1 minute. We just say, get out what you feel is valuable in 1 moment, in 1 minute. And so somebody will stand up and say, hi, my name's Paulina, and they'll give some context. And I'll say, good. And right when people think we're going to go to the next person, I say, now you have to do that again, but 30 seconds. And then we whittle it down to 15, and you see where this is going. And the game is really about message prioritization. So when we had somebody reach out to us one time and said, hey, I'm dealing with this athlete or this administrator, and I'm having trouble getting them to buy in, I always ask, well, tell me what you're doing that is working or not working. And if we get any of that information back, it may not surprise you. Once you ask some folks to do some reflection, they just go away because they don't want, they want a quick answer. But then when we ask that, a lot of them come back and they're like, well, I gave them research, and they went into this lengthy explanation. And I said, well, here's the thing. You kind of want to get to the headline of what matters most to that person. And this is from what I always understood. The biggest core of improv is learning how to listen so you build off of that. What role do you think that listening by itself, just becoming a better listener, would play in helping people then in turn reframe their message and prioritize its importance?
Absolutely. That is, listening is one of the aspects of attention. So I think a good improv class, a large percentage of the exercises relate to listening, and games that require that, because you're completely right. We've lost communication skills, and it's the listening part of that. We're all kind of thinking about what we're going to say when our turn comes, rather than waiting to the end of the sentence. That's why games that don't let you speak until you get the last letter of what the person is talking to you says, and then you can say your thing, is a good thing. No, listening is one of the skills that is being lost, and is very, very important. I agree with you. There was something I wanted to. The other thing is, you can help some of the people some of the time, and all the people some of the time, but you can't help all the people all the time. Once I had a very prestigious client that, I think I get these clients because I'm a Stanford person, so they think I must know what I'm doing. So I didn't have to make the workshop in detail for this group, but we went off to a retreat center, and we got in a circle, and we're throwing the sound balls, whoosh, boom, hop, bang, blah, blah, and we're having a grand time. And I'm side coaching. I'm saying, okay, now pay more attention to receiving. Really listen to what your partner's saying, so that you can not only say the word, but say it in the manner that they sent it. Okay, real good. So we stopped, and the man that had hired me said, Patricia, excuse me for a moment. Nix on all this good advice. Let's get on with the fun and games, okay? Because they wanted to play improv games so that they could one-up each other and laugh and whatnot. They were not interested in the value of improv, better listening. So I he's the client. So we went on to the fun and games. They're just, you pick your battles there, I think.
No, I think and if I remember correctly, because you have a wonderful post about this on your blog, that was to a group of middle managers at a famous tech company in Silicon Valley, correct?
That was, yes, indeed.
And that's the interesting thing, right? We bestow these titles or ideas on, oh man, well, Silicon Valley has it figured out, or you've even alluded to it in a very charming and self-deprecating way. You're a Stanford professor. You have it figured out. But the fact is a lot of us reject change. I mean, that's really what improv seems to be about in my mind. Now, it's many things, so I'm not trying to oversimplify your life's work, but it's learning how to take advantage of change. I mean, when something comes our way, you got to make the most of it. I think of a game that we had played at one point in time, and I may not get this out perfectly because it's a fairly involved game at this point, and feel free to give me criticisms on this, and then I'm going to turn it back to Allie. So we were standing in a circle, and we just wanted some associations, right? It was after lunch, wake people up. And I said, somebody choose a letter, and the letter was M as in milk or moo, the sound of a cow. I just want to make sure I'm clear for anybody listening. And I said, great, we're going to come up with an object that starts with M. And a participant said marker. And I said, phenomenal. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go around the room. And Allie, how many people were 12? Were there 12, 13?
Yeah, about 12 to 15.
Okay. We try to limit it, Patricia, just because we want to be so immersive. We try to keep things small. So I said, you still have to use the letter M, but you have to go around and either speak to a characteristic of the marker. It could be a use or a color. So for those of you listening, right, you could say maroon. That's acceptable. That's a color of marker. Patricia, let's play some improv. What's something that starts with M that you could say about a marker?
A marker, mind-blowing.
Good. It could be a mind-blowing marker. Allie had a great one, and she referred to a use of the marker, which could be to modify. Somebody said to mark, right? We're learning the obvious. And we got to an individual, and I think I might have mentioned this on the air before, but if not, good friend, right? But it got to him, and he got really angry. And I said, well, what's going on? I'll call him Bob for the purpose of this. And he said, well, one, I don't understand what the hell this game has to do with anything. And two, it seems to be a test of vocabulary. He goes, by the time it got to him, he just was struggling to come up. So, he kind of lost his cool for a moment, and he'd use that word choice as well, I think. And we had two Marines in the room. And I stopped for a moment and I asked the gentleman, I said, hey, when you were training to become a Marine, did you ever do anything that didn't directly look like combatives or warfare or what you would consider to be the job of a Marine? And he said, absolutely. We disassembled toilets and we had to do this and that. And these things taught us attention to detail. And so what I tried to do, and I hope I didn't fail because I look to you for instruction here, Patricia, is I tried to explain to the other gentleman, see, that's what we're doing. We're trying to come up with not the answer. That's easy. We can all go out there and think in black and white and be very lazy. But to think of alternatives, let's say you couldn't afford somebody's speaker fee, or you couldn't figure out how to get a leak to stop. You have to think of all kinds of odd, potentially weird solutions to meet that outcome. And so we were trying to get him to understand that it's not the thing, it's what the exercise represented of exploring other plausible scenarios or uses and staying on a common thread. Is that poor teaching? Is that not what a game like that would teach? Or how would you improve upon that?
You get to decide, I think, what's the best thing in that moment for that person. I don't know of any way to kind of give guidelines about how to turn something around. And it makes sense that you'll occasionally get a person who just freaks out and then blames the game or the class. I think the thing I would want to do, instead of necessarily justifying why we were doing it, is make him feel okay to not have done it. It's fine. That's okay. You don't have to have a word. Yep. And not make a deal of it, sort of, because my greater role is to make everybody safe there rather than to justify what I'm doing.
Yep.
So it's not always easy, and especially if someone's combative about, what the hey, are you doing this for us? It's so stupid. I'd say, that's okay. No, leave if you want to, or well, that's fine. Yeah, this is tough. We've run out of words, haven't we? I have, or something like that.
Yeah, that's valuable. Yeah, Allie, anything?
Yeah. So Patricia, what I was going to say is, I think it's sometimes when something's new like this, like playing games is new for a lot of people. I know, like in my life right now, I'm trying to learn how to play the guitar, which is super hard. And I'm not this very artsy. Okay, let me rephrase. I would never have considered myself artsy or creative before I tried this. But when you try something new, do you ever find yourself, or do you have an experience with students who trying something new, falling back into this idea of trying to control? And I'm wondering if you've ever experienced that in your own life when trying something new, and how you would work your way out of it.
Sure. Oh, that's the most normal thing I can think of. And one of the things you do with a student that's struggling in some way is to say, that's normal. Everybody struggles here. We all want to control or want to do it in a certain way. So what you're doing is so understandable. I've done it that way, et cetera. And then you try to lead them to, well, let's see, one step at a time. Also, I want to say something about giving new improv students kind of things that make them uncomfortable. I just read a wonderful article that's person was going to be leading an improv group for 300 people in a big auditorium, et cetera. And her idea was to have everybody stand up and have to dance weird to do something. Okay. And so the person who was counseling her about whether to use that game or not said, you don't have to pick something that makes people uncomfortable to do something creative. There are likely to be other ways. So there are a lot of games improv games that really are more uncomfortable than others. And I think, and there are choices that we can make not to do that kind of a thing. You can have in an audience of 300, you can have them turn to the person next to you and have some kind of a listening game or a conversation or making up a story together, which is different than standing up and having to do something really sort of physically stupid. Eventually, we should be able to do that too. But I think you pick your battles and always keeping in mind, I sort of my rules is the student is right.
So that leads me right into my next question, which was, how do you decide which games to play and what to prioritize in terms of your teaching? Do you just truly feed off the group, or is it something that you prioritize ahead of time? And I'd just be interested what your system or strategy is there.
Well, I generally have a purpose for the session. Like we want to get to know each other or learn each other's names, or we want to do something that's spontaneous and surprises us in some way that is improvising. So I've got some ideas and I've got a group of games. I always I show up with let's see, what is this? This is a little pad of multicolored cards. And my lesson is always on one of these cards. So I write down 2 or 3 games that I think might be a way in. And there's some that I like because they're less threatening than others. So I guess the big answer to the question is I sort of prepare from I have a list now of, for a 10-week class, maybe 150, 200 games and exercises of all kinds. And I think I follow my own impulse. I'm improvising too. In fact, I've said that I come into the room and I look at the people and I start to try to learn their names. That's the first thing I always do. And so that I will also make mistakes when I try it again. That's my purpose is also to be one of them get a bunch of their names and just make us talking to each other before we try to create something together. And then, I don't know, I think I opened myself up to the muse or something. I really believe I leave my body when I teach. And something, I don't know, the spirit of improv kind of, that sounds kind of airy-fairy, comes through and it's responding to what's happening in the room. And that doesn't always work. I was invited to go do with some teenagers. These were 14 to 16-year-olds. And I'm an old lady now. And to get them to stand in a circle and or open a gift, I had a bunch of the teenage boys, and I said, there's a package sitting on your lap right now. Look down and pick it up. Oh, let's see what it is. Okay, let's open the package and see what's there. And so I'd go around, everybody tell me what you got in your package. And the boy said, nothing in mine. I got nothing. I got absolutely nothing. Ugh. So there was some way that I don't know that you can teach improv to teenagers, especially teenage boys. They're too worried about, being cool. So you pick your battles.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And I want to talk to you about a great post that you had called "The Tyranny of Tables" that speaks to environments. And just a brief aside before we get to that, that's something that I really challenge those of you listening. When we're talking about improv, and maybe this is insightful for you, Patricia, as we get to know each other a little bit. My first take on this was really coming from a place when I was burnout. So when I just coached athletes, that was my entire job. It would start to seem like every day became the same. Of course, there were different challenges or what have you, but I had done this, for about 15 years, right? And so at a lot of the places that I had worked at, you had all kinds of equipment. Now, we also went to military bases that it was very Spartan and what have you. And I think when I first got that taste of that, being shipped off to these military bases to do 2 or 3 week kind of workshops, learning how to figure out, oh, we don't have this, let's do that. It gave me my first taste. But then when I went back to my day-to-day job of running these larger groups, it wasn't challenging enough. And so we would have interns saying, and sorry for the jargon, not that any of it's beyond you, but somebody said, hey, we're teaching acceleration today. What do you want? Do you want med balls and the sleds and this and that? And I was just so burnt out that I said, you know what, man, pick one tool, pick any tool you want. And I will show you how to run an entire acceleration session with that tool alone. And everything we do will be able to be backed by science. Cause that's very important in that aspect, right? Like when you're dealing with multi-million-dollar athletes, we do have to back these things up. If you ever went to strength coach court, heaven forbid anybody got injured, you need to say, this is why we chose this method. And so I started doing that throughout the week because otherwise you start seeing folks spoon-fed. And so what we would do is alter the environment. And so then if a coach said, well, fine, I see you did these 3 things with that tool, but what if? And I go, well, why don't you lay that out for me? Put a cone where you want it or put this, create a constraint in the environment. And wouldn't you know it, the environment starts to teach it and the act itself becomes the progression, right? So this is what made your Tyranny of Tables blog so fascinating. And I'm going to paraphrase just for the listeners and I'm going to let you take it over. You had mentioned, and I'll let you fill in some of these blanks, that you were going to an event and you had sent your PowerPoint to the event organizer and you arrived 2 hours early to spec out the location in an attempt to figure out the strategy for managing, a workshop in a less than desirable space. And you had this idea of, you said, and I wonder if this is still your opinion, you said the optimal space for teaching improv is a semi-empty room with a circle of chairs that can be moved and rearranged. It needs to be large enough that the full group of folks participating can stand in a circle or 4 and 5 circles and be able to see one another. This was not the case here. I'm going to let you go from here, but I'd love to know more about how you utilize the environment to facilitate great conversation and improvisation.
Well, the key thing is that you've got to have people who can connect to each other. Circles are ideal. And if it's a large group and if you can get a number of circles, but the room that I was describing was a giant ballroom with something like 300 tables, each with 12 people. And there were maybe 70 people in the room, but they were spread out all over the place. And so I said, oh, I'm so happy to see you all today. Hey, why don't some of you move together? So I tried to get the group to come and even if they were sitting at the tables, but two or three people moved and the rest of them kind of looked at me and looked at their smartphones. No matter what I did, it was doomed because I couldn't create the proximity. I had asked the host, can we move these tables back? And so that we could have a space. And they said, no, the workshop that comes after needs it to be just like it is. So I was kind of stuck with this physical limitation. And I wrote about it because I wanted to report some things, sometimes even improvisers can't fix. We really need to be able to get near each other. That's why the challenge of teaching improv in Zoom rooms is great. I've done it now. I did a 10-week class for Stanford, and I'm learning a lot of ways to try to connect. But boy, them ballrooms, not the best place to teach an improv class or anything that has a physical dimension. And improv is not just about ideas and words. It's about humans getting close to each other, being able to touch each other.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And it's something we think about as well, because while we try to limit our workshops to 15 people, there are times organizations will bring us in and there may be 30 and 40, and we're going to make the most of that, and then Allie and I have to think about it. It might seem so silly to hear this, but her and I, we've had tremendous experience running large groups of athletes. So like at one point in time, I literally had to run 100 rugby players through a session, and that's its own form of chaos. But when you're teaching improv, having 40 folks, if you really want to dial it in, and like you said, make that connection intense, not that's poor word choice. Make that deep connection with them so that they see, okay, here's what I'm struggling with. Here are the constraints we have to deal with within this improv game. Let's act these out. Now let's reflect upon them. Let's build, right? It's co-creation. Improv is co-creation. And there does get to be a point where, there's diminishing returns if the groups are just bigger and bigger and bigger, because then you're also bringing in that, well, it's easy for people to hide. When you're already talking about not wanting to be judged, now they hide. And I almost wonder, sometimes, and this is me just talking out loud, Allie, if it would be different if we made people apply to go to those workshops. Now, of course, the problem is you're gatekeeping a little bit, but you're offering a constraint there where there's a little bit more of a commitment of saying, I'm willing to normalize failure. I'm willing to go into a group of my peers and have conversations where I may not be the smartest one in the room, but damn it, I'm going to learn how to read the room and I'm going to have a better handle on myself. I mean, any one of you thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think you're right that the hardest thing to do is as a class, any class of improv class that people have to go to. That's part of something that they have to show up. And I think you have to be very clever in a situation like that to honor the fact that there are people that don't want to be doing this at all, and find things that are easier, find things that are not going to be embarrassing, stuff like that. Find a way to get some wins. But whenever possible, I think your idea is people ought to volunteer to come to this. The idea of it being voluntary is pretty important. It's not always possible. But.
Well, what's interesting about that is that we had somebody in our past come to an apprenticeship and they probably didn't want to be there. They were not made to go, but they were highly suggested. It was highly suggested that they attend. And they were frustrated beyond all measure. I think this individual would tell you himself that he did not love the experience. But then, Brett, you got a message not so long ago from the same individual saying that he finally understood it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we got one today, and I think that this will go into something that I want to ask Patricia after this. I'm looking at my phone as I'm saying this because this individual said, hey, I want to tell you how thankful I am that I ended up taking the apprenticeship and embracing improv. And he talks about a situation he had today where he utilized some of the games. And one of them, Patricia, it's one of my favorites. Allie, I don't know how you feel about it. And we certainly didn't invent it, right? Nobody invented any of this stuff in improv, is 5-3-1. Does that name ring a bell? But I know people call it different. So the idea is, Patricia, and going back to the coaching example that you and Allie so wonderfully utilize, is there's 3 of us playing. So maybe we'll just play it right now. One of us gets 5 words, one gets 3, and one gets 1. So when you guys were talking about the basketball coach, or let's say we're having a basketball team that is not doing a great job communicating, if somebody said, I'm open, pass the ball, right? That's 5. Now, depending on the role Patricia wanted to play, Patricia, respond any way you want to, I'm open, pass the ball. You have 3 words.
Send it here.
Okay, Allie?
Me.
Right. Oh, now in that case, we might have all been the same person. But let's say I'm athlete number 1, Patricia's athlete number 2, and Allie, you're the coach. That could have been, well, let's role play it. I'm open, pass the ball.
I'm over here.
No.
There you go, right? And now we'd probably get a rap on the wrist because but the reality is, and this is what I love so much about what you said, Patricia, and how it feeds into what Allie and I, we kind of have to break some of the rules of improv.
Sure, yeah.
But you had this post on April 5th, 2020, and you were sharing some of your artwork, and you said, Robert Poynton, an applied improv wizard, has given us some wise tips for the improv stage. And I have modified these instructions. Let go, appreciate more, use everything. But you also said within that you teach improvisation not as comedy, but as common sense. So even though we have to say yes and what have you, Allie's spot on in that you are going to have people in life that do reject your offer. They say no, or I'm not doing that. And that's where we have to balance. Like you said, it's not comedy, it's common sense. And in common sense, and in the real world, it's common sense. You're gonna have to deal with difficult people. So where do we need to sometimes be, this is a poor question, but even when you find yourself having to break the rules or struggling with some points of classic improv teaching, or where do you still struggle with improv in general? Surely even as a Stanford professor, that it's part of your daily life, where do you struggle most with it?
Well, it's just that first thing, listening and paying attention. I have to constantly remind myself to be present and do that, because I'm normal, and that means that my mind goes off into my stuff. So that'll always be a struggle. I think staying on course. It's really easy to get distracted. So when I say that improv ideas are easy to understand, but they're not easy necessarily to practice for all the reasons that we've talked about. We want to be liked, or our egos are involved in this. And I think even if you're using a little bit of improv life way or improv mindset, it can be a help. I don't think there's any perfect improviser that I know of. And I know a lot of good improvisers. I've got a good friend now who's in Japan, who's teaching English to Japanese students, and we're collaborating. We're going to get together and have a couple of people join us in a Zoom room and see what happens. And we're going to improvise not improvise to tell stories or to make scenes, but to find out what's on each other's mind and see if we can be resources for each other. Different ways that you can use the listening and being mindful. My favorite maxim, by the way, I'm often asked that question, is wake up to the gifts. I think there's so much right now at every moment in each of our lives that we're receiving from others that we miss, because we're often looking at what's not working or what's wrong, or that the negative mindset kind of jumps in, and we forget to notice how much we're receiving from others. That bagger at Safeway there was standing on his feet for 8 hours so that I could get my groceries. And right now, you're taking your time. You could be out, golly, doing all kinds of interesting things, but I'm receiving your attention and the wonderful and the technology that's allowing us to talk to each other. So I think we need to keep remembering the gifts that are everywhere. I think it's a metaphor for improv that everything is a kind of a gift. Robert Poynton calls it an offer. Let go of outcomes, notice more, but use everything. Good advice.
No question. And I have one more question for you because we want to honor your time, and it's not missed upon us, the gifts that you've given us on this. Selfishly, there's so much I want to ask you, but really we're either going to bring one of our workshops to you, or somehow we've got to get this done. And if you'll allow me to just get dramatic for a moment, but sometimes people need to hear these calls to action. What do you think is at risk if people do not embrace the idea, or at the very least, the principles of improv? We live in a time of rapid change. This whole idea of where do you want to be in 5 years, I think, is a well-intentioned question, but silly, especially nowadays. But for the person that is still just like not open to letting go and listening and realizing that we all play roles daily, so role playing is not new. Improv is life. Well, you'll deal with it every day. What are the ramifications if they don't embrace it a little bit more, do you think?
Well, I think we miss being human. That would be my sort of wrap up of that. And I think it's not easy to be human, especially in this virtual world. But we need to remember those simple things. And if we don't want the time to pass and miss life. So improv just gives you permission to be normal, to be yourself, try stuff, and pay more attention to other people than to yourself.
Yep. I mean, well stated. We tell our coaches and listeners and managers all the time, don't sit here and tell your team that it's okay to make mistakes, or don't watch them. I mean, I still remember the day, it won't get out of my head, when a coach said, "Hey, I love you, but I couldn't come to one of those workshops. I can't play make-believe." And I go, "Do you tell your athletes that when they go do walkthroughs? Do you tell a fighter that when they go shadow box against an invisible opponent? Do you go tell, wow, you don't play make-believe?" Patricia, I'm going to give you and Allie the final word. But before I do, I just want to encourage everybody, guys, if you have not gone already to improvwisdom.com, if you have not already bought Patricia's book, Improv Wisdom, and translated in 9 languages, there's an audio book, there's everything. I mean, Stephen Pressfield calls it absolute required reading. And it's a goal of mine, a life goal, to actually meet Mr. Pressfield. His work has impacted my life. So that is super high praise.
Thank you.
Everybody needs to go to improvwisdom.com without question. Allie, Patricia, I want to give you guys the final word before we sign off, if there's anything you'd like to add.
I just want to say, Patricia, thank you for permission to be weird, because I need more of that in my life. I am extremely unusual as a person, and I would like to be more human. So, Brett, you heard it from Patricia that I have permission to be myself and be weird.
You need to be weirder, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And your weirdness is just perfect, just as it is. Be yourself. Everybody else is taken. So you're already unique. So trust yourself, and you'll have more fun, and more things will come to you, and you'll be more helpful to other people, as you both are right now.
No, we hope so. Well, we thank you again for coming on. And folks, make sure that you go to the show notes and fill out the podcast reflections that are always so graciously done by Allie Kirshner on this, so you don't miss the most impactful lessons of this show. For Brett Bartholomew, Patricia Madson, and Allie Kirshner, we are Art of Coaching, and we'll talk to you next time.